Hey guys, Bound to Divide here with Abletontips, and today I'm going to be taking you through 3 breakbeat drum patterns and showing you how to build them. Okay, so first let's just play through all the 3 patterns so you can hear what they sound like. Okay, so I'm sure you can, by the naming, see where I pulled inspiration from for these. First one is inspired by Bicep glue. I know the sounds are not exactly the same, but it's more the pattern for each one that I'm trying to focus on, where to place the kicks and the snares and what sort of sounds to use. So the second one is inspired by Franky Wah, and I think it's his Oxygen remix. And the third one is from my track Spirals. So yeah, let's check out how they were made. So all of the samples I made, all of the samples I used are from the D Premium Volume 6 sample pack. The break sample is a think break sample. So when you're making break beats, typically the foundation of the break comes from an original break sample, and usually it's from these two really famous breaks. The one's the Amen break, and the other one is the think break. So I just searched on Google. I can't actually remember where exactly I found this break sample, but I just searched for a think break. And if you do the same, you'll find tons of free ones, tons of paid ones, but just find one that you like the sound of, that sounds nice and clean. And then we're going to be basically slicing it up like you see over here and building a different pattern, but we'll get back to that in a minute. So the first channel here is the kick drum, and so for this pattern here, we're placing the kicks just like this. It's quite a long, deep kick. So here we're placing a kick at marker 1 and then at 1.3.3, and then it just basically repeats. So there's nothing really fancy going on here, no ghost kicks or anything. And then we get the snare, and so the typical breakbeat pattern looks something like this for the most common one, where you have a... But what they did with glue is they put an extra snare over here, which sounds great. Gives it like a really nice bounce. And that sample is just the snare 006 from D Premium Volume 6. And again, nothing fancy happening here, no ghost snares or anything. And then we've got that layered with another snare here, which is more like an acoustic sounding snare. And I've actually used 2 different snares. So I got the snare from the Acoustic Fill 016, and you can see I just chopped it out of there. And so together they layer quite nicely. Okay, and then we've got the main offbeat hi-hat. So I wanted to find something that sounded a bit more acoustic too. So I thought this hat, Close Hat 003, sounded a bit more acoustic. And here you can see I've just duplicated it, and we've got it playing like quietly afterwards at -11 dB. This one's at 0, and that just adds like a really nice bounce to the hi-hat if we play it in context. And then we've got this tambourine. So this is from Tam Loop 021, and I've basically just taken out the first one so it doesn't play over the kick. So I've got a fade on there. Usually it would sound like this. And then over here I've taken it out to almost like let the break have a little breather in it. And I just noticed that in the original it feels like there's a bit of almost like a gap each time, and it feels like that's where the break loops. And these gaps I think are pretty important to get that like sampled break feel. And you'll see in all the different loops there's these little pauses that happen, and they're not all exactly the same, but they usually happen on the snare. So when the last snare hits, you'll feel this gap. So just right after the snare, then it plays one more hit here on the tambourine, and then we have a gap. And then comes back on the kick drum. Same thing with the shaker. So the shaker is, it's called a tam loop here, but to me it sounds like a shaker. I'd say that's definitely a shaker. And yeah, so I also just put that gap there. And then here's the more interesting part of the loop, and this is the chopped up think break. So this is how it sounds. And you'll hear in the think break, the reason why we use these loops is they've got these like very characterful kind of snares and ghost snares and stuff that are really hard to program. So that's why when you chop them, it just sounds so much better if you're chopping it from an actual like sampled breakbeat. And how I did this was, if we just take the original one, I'm going to copy it down here and stretch it out into its full loop. This is what it originally looked like. So it sounds pretty cool on its own. And this is not the original think break. This is somebody else has chopped this into this pattern, and it's also at 175. So usually it's a bit of a no-no to warp something from 175 down to 124, and people recommend actually slicing out the little hits. But I just find it leads to like a really unnatural sound if you're doing that, because you start to lose all these like little ghost notes that are happening in specific places. So I just warp it, and nobody's ever said to me that they can hear the warping unless you kind of like solo the break. So here I want to basically make this pattern follow mine. And so we've got snares at this position and this position, but in the original, we've got the snare in a different position. So in the original, we've got them over here, here, and here. So how I do this is I just make sure I take the snare and copy it and paste it over there, then bring this back. And I can take this one, cut it out, and move it over here. And then I don't want to use this kick because I've already got a kick in there, and it kind of just felt weird layered together. So I took this hit and just played it twice. So now it sounds like this. And then we can just take this and copy it over here again, just to fill it out, so that we can constantly hear the sort of tambourines and stuff going. We don't want these pauses in there. And then we just loop it like this.
Hi, this video is sponsored by us. If you like these tutorials and want to support the channel, check out our website packed with online courses and professional sound packs. If you want to cut years of your learning curve, check the PML Beginner to Advanced Music Production program for Ableton Live. You will know Ableton inside out and learn how to write, produce, mix and master complete tracks. You learn step by step at your own speed, from an empty file to professional production, as if we're sitting side by side in the studio. Thank you for listening, and now let's get back to your tutorial.
But now there's a problem with having all these clicks in there, and in Ableton the easiest way to deal with those is we just need to crossfade each sample into each other, and you can highlight all of them and then just right click here and go create crossfades on clip edges, or Control Alt F. And then you might sometimes still hear like some clicks, so you need to go in and clean those up, like over here. So maybe a bit more of a crossfade is required. Let's crossfade it the other way. There we go. So that's pretty smooth. And now you could just consolidate that and call that your break. And then I did really no EQ or anything to this. I like the sound of it. So then we're left with this. Okay, So that's the first one. Oh yeah, and then obviously here's a pause over here. And then they high pass it. So on the group, I've got some processing, and you'll see there's an auto filter which gets automated on over here after that pause. Okay, and the group processing that I do have on here, I'll take you through that quickly. So we've got a saturator, and saturators are great on drum buses like this because it kind of glues everything together, and it also controls the transients because it'll clip anything that's peaking too high, and at the same time it also saturates stuff, and saturation sounds really good, especially on like hi-hats and high end. It kind of softens it and takes out some of the harshness. So yeah, the saturator, I've got it with the bass down at -3, and that's to make sure that the kick isn't distorting too much, because this controls how much the low end gets saturated. So if we turn this dial down, we get less distortion on the kick. Turn it up, you get more. Yeah, and then the drive is just at 6, and then you kind of have to match the output by just gain staging it, so checking that when you bypass this, there's no huge difference in volume, because otherwise you're just tricking your ear into thinking that the loop sounds better because it's louder. So make sure you remove all the gain that the saturator is adding. And then I got this EQ8, which is just taking off some of the high end, because I just didn't like how bright some of the elements were. So I'm taking everything above 12 kilohertz. If you can hear much higher than that, I know a lot of people can't, but I really hate the harshness that happens up here. So that just cleans it up a little bit. And then we've got this dark small room preset from Ableton. And I'm automating the decay time on this reverb to fill this gap over here. So it goes up to 3 seconds. And then, yeah, the auto filter, which I've already explained. All right, let's go to the second loop. And this one was inspired by Franky Wah. All right, so similar process here with all the chopping. So I'm not going to go too heavily into the chopping. I'm just going to talk more about the pattern. So here we've got the same kick pattern as in the previous one. So we've got a kick here. If I had to look at this as the 1, it would be the 1, and then this would be the 3.3.3. It's the same pattern that you use in most drum and bass too. So yeah, the samples I'm using here is this laid kick 002 and snare 15. And so no processing on that. On the snare, I've taken out a little bit of the fundamental and some of the sub. And then we've got this break again, which I've chopped into this pattern. So yeah, it's slightly different pattern. Instead of having a snare here, here, and there, or was it? I can't remember exactly. Instead of doing this, we're kind of just dropping that snare and now just doing a typical. And then this is following that pattern. And I've processed this slightly differently. We've got an EQ8 on here, which is taking out a lot more of the high end, because I noticed in his track, the break sounded quite a lot darker. And we've also got some reverb on this directly, and that's partly to just fill this gap over here where we have the pause, just to make it feel a bit more natural, which sounds cool to me. And then I've got this offbeat hat, so this is pretty typical thing I've noticed that Franky Wah does, is having this offbeat like 909 sounding hat, and that's got no processing on it. It's just landing on the offbeat. And then we've got saturation again, similar saturation to what we had over here. And then the small dark room preset again, to just put everything into the same space. You can hear without it. Feels a little disconnected. Like this, everything feels like it's in the same place, same space. Okay, and then the last one is the spirals from my track Spirals. And this is a really simple pattern, but I think it's super effective. So it's following the original Think Break pattern where we've got the snares in the same position, but I'm adding an extra like little ghost kick here and then another one over here. So we've got like 2 ghost kicks over here. And ghost kicks are just really quieter kicks that are, if you think about a drummer, they don't usually just hit the kick once. They usually like do this sort of preemptive ghost note. It's just a bit quieter, but it adds some bounce to the kick. And that sounds like this. So in the normal breakbeat pattern, we would usually have a kick here and here, but this doesn't work because now we have a snare on this beat. So we're just dropping the kick out and only having 1 kick per bar. And the ghost kicks sound like this on the last bar. So they're basically landing on these 16th notes, and I think it adds a really nice bounce to it. And then in terms of processing, no processing on the break, and over here we've got an EQ8 just taking out a bit of the high end again, some saturation, and this small dark room. So similar processing on all the groups. Okay, that's it. I hope you learned something and you now have a bit more of an understanding of the different types of break patterns. There's tons more and you can get creative and make your own ones. Listen to a bunch of Bicep, you'll hear they have all these really weird and groovy patterns that they've come up with. So yeah, the sky's the limit. But these are just a few ideas. All right, thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one.